not turn things around in your life. They have already concluded that God is not going to bring you out. So my assignment today, my brothers and sisters, is clear. It's simply to encourage someone to believe that regardless of what you had to deal with in the past, regardless of what you're dealing with right now, regardless of what you have yet to deal with in the future, God says that you are not to be counted out. As a matter of fact, why don't you tell somebody, you better not count me out? You've been through too much already. If I were to look in your faith file, you've already conquered enemies that most folk thought you couldn't conquer. You've already survived the worst of times. As a matter of fact, if folk knew all the hell that you had to go through just this past week, they'd be looking at you funny right now, probably when they sit next to you. If people saw you and what you had to deal with just to get through the day, somebody would get up and walk and pat you on your back and commend you that you are here in the house of the Lord on today. And because you've already survived the worst of times, God told me to tell you that you've taken the best shot that the devil had to give you, and you're still standing. Because you've taken the best shot that the devil had to give you, and you're still standing, God said, if you survive that, what makes you think you won't survive what's coming next? So what I want to do, if you got time this morning, I want to unpack this text so that we can look at the example of this young man who's going to help us to develop our don't count me out demeanor. This young man is a brother by the name of David. We're familiar with David, aren't we? When we look at David in this particular narrative, you'll discover that in this 17th chapter, it is where several people in this text have already counted David out. If you were to take your time and read the entire 17th chapter, you would discover that David was counted out by at least 3 groups of people. In reverse order, David, number 1, was counted out by Goliath. In verses 42 through 44, David says that when Goliath moved closer to him, he looked him over. And when he discovered that he was just a boy, the Bible says that he despised him, cursed him by his God, and then says to David, I'm getting ready to give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. So it's safe to say that when you look at verses 42 through 44, that David was counted out by his foes. Well, that's no big deal, is it? Because we don't expect our foes to give us credit, do we? We don't expect our foes to bless God for our lives. We don't expect our foes to think that we'll still be standing at the end of the day. So the mere fact that David was counted out by his foes is not a big deal. But when you keep on reading this text, you'll discover that not only was he counted out by his foes, but David was also counted out by his friend. Bible says that when David showed up at the battlefield, Saul, who's his friend at the time, looks David in the face and says these words to him. You can't go out and fight Goliath because you're only a boy. Saul looked at David and concluded, based on his stature on the outside, that he did not have what it took on the inside to be successful for the assignment that God had given him. Can I just park right here if I keep the engine running and tell you, it's dangerous, y'all, to judge a book by its cover. It is dangerous to look on the outside and conclude that someone doesn't have what it takes on the inside. In fact, I dare say to somebody that somebody's missed their blessing because you judge somebody too quick. I'm talking to somebody who's had folk walk out of your life because they judged you too quick. Don't judge me till it's over. Because the best must have hurt David the most is when you read verse 28. I said I was doing this in reverse order. David was counted out by his family. The Bible says when David shows up on the battlefield, the ones that should have supported David the most, his own family, should have had his back. But when you look at verse 28, the Bible says that David's older brother saw David on the battlefield and asked, why are you even here? What you come up here for? He questioned David about who's keeping the sheep. He wanted to know why David wasn't somewhere fanning flies off his father's flock. He questioned why David came to the battlefield. He accused David of being a troublemaker. In other words, there was somebody in David's own family that did not believe that David had what it took. And that's one thing to be counted out by your foes. It's another thing to be counted out by your friends. But when your own family don't believe in you, when the hate you're receiving comes from your own home, when the people you eat with, when the folk who watch you grow up, you run the risk of being in a very dangerous place. I'm talking to somebody right now that's in that same place that David was. Folk have totally written you off. When you look at this text, you'll discover that David was in a dangerous place. And if you're not careful, sometimes public doubt can lead to personal disqualification. Preach, Mac, you just said. Stop rewinding and press play. Sometimes public doubt can lead to personal disqualification. When you don't have validation from family and friends, when you don't have a support system in place, when you don't have people around you to help you celebrate your success and to help you fix your failures, when you don't have people who can serve as the wind beneath your wings, if you're not careful, they can cause you to internalize your own insecurities. The thing about David in this text is that even though his family didn't believe him, even though his friends didn't believe in him, even though his foes didn't believe in him, David believed in himself. That tells me, my brothers and sisters, that when you can't find nobody else to believe in you, you've got to have enough security about yourself to believe in yourself. If nobody in your family thinks you can, if nobody on your job thinks you can, if nobody in your life thinks you can, matter of fact, if nobody in your church thinks you can, you have to have the ability to wrap your arms around. Nobody gave David a chance, but David gave David a chance.